I'm looking at the influence of cold exposure primarily on heart rate variability.
Okay.
And that's heart rate variability tells us a lot about what's happening with the autonomic nervous system. And that's why I'm most interested in it. But so the semaglutide, which is a GLP-1 agonist, is marketed as Ozempic for diabetes, which was all it was
Okay.
originally approved for.
Okay.
But then they found that people were losing a lot of weight on this. And then it was marketed as, I think it's Wegovy. Again,
Oh,
I'm
you
not
go
big with the
yes, yes, yes.
brand names, but
Yep.
I think it's Wegovy, and that's Ozempic. It's prescribed in a bit of a different dose, but it's the exact same thing. I think intelligence, the benefit of intelligence is overrated. I think discipline and hard work is probably underrated.
Well, welcome to the Epicest podcast. I'm Doug, your host, and I have Stefan Eberspaecher with me. And we were just talking about BMI and stuff. And so we'll get it back into that. I met you, Stefan, through my cousin Sandra,
Yes.
and probably just a few months ago, right?
Yeah.
And she thought that we would get along, and we sat down and had a call. I think we're
And we have.
yeah, and it's like, oh my gosh, I could just talk to you all day. I mean, we have similar interests in health and
Mhm.
around health and fitness and all those things. You, of course, being much more knowledgeable than me and much more technical. I'm sort of from a very layman's perspective. And so we've had some great conversations. You say some things to me that, I don't quite understand because they're so technical, but I love it. And I love, the perspective that you have. And we don't always agree on things either, which I like too, because I like to have, I don't want people around me who just agree with me. I want to learn about these things, right?
Yeah.
So, welcome to the podcast. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
Maybe just give some of your credentials and
Yeah, I will say first, I do like the technical side. I've
yeah.
always liked to understand. I've always tried to break things down. I was never, as a student, very good with memorization, but I knew if I could break a system down and understood how it worked, then I didn't have to memorize it. But there's two sides to the work that I do. I'm a chiropractor. I've been working as a chiropractor for the last 20 years. I've had a very, I would say, or somewhat unusual career as a chiropractor. I've worked in developing countries. I worked in the Dominican Republic. I worked in Botswana, working for a charity, an international charity called World Spine Care,
Hmm.
where we were building a primary care musculoskeletal clinics serving underserviced populations in these countries and in countries where the healthcare system particularly wasn't providing conservative care in the manner that was sufficient. But also, my organization, we're trained surgeons in these countries as well too. So not just working on the conservative care side, working to build up the capacity of these countries.
Hmm.
I spent 5 years living in Australia. That was not with the charity. That was just on my own. And so I've had a little bit of an unusual career. I'm now working at a multidisciplinary clinic in Ottawa, and I work with a physiotherapist, other chiropractors, medical specialists, physiatrists, sports medicine specialists, a neurooptometrist. We have a great mental health team, a psychotherapist, a psychologist. We have an occupational therapist. I work I would say a little more than half of my patients are probably veterans or active duty military.
Oh,
So
well.
I'm not military myself, but I've been working in that population. That's given me a really good appreciation for what our serving members of the military go through, and
Hmm.
also what they're left with after serving as well too. So
Can't imagine.
yeah, the other side, I'm actually currently doing a PhD at the University of Ottawa, and that's in cold physiology. So through the Department of Human Kinetics, I'm looking at the influence of cold exposure primarily on heart rate variability,
Okay.
and that's heart rate variability is tells us a lot about what's happening with the autonomic nervous system, and that's why I'm most interested in it. But
And yeah, the HRV really fascinates me. I'm kind of new to that. Maybe the last 6 months I've sort of tapped into the. At first, I had heard of heart rate variability
Yeah.
and the significance of that, and it is quite significant. And there's a connection to the vagus nerve, I understand, and the vagus nerve actually affects a lot of things in the body. So that you're doing a PhD in this, and like I said, you're much smarter than me. That's PhD. You can't be a lightweight to do a PhD in something that technical, especially.
It's nice to have a background, but I don't know how smart you have to be. Just have to work hard,
Okay.
right? So it's about working hard and yeah, persisting. There's just a lot of work, a lot of reading. I this is a bit of a tangent, but I think intelligence, the benefit of intelligence is overrated. I think discipline and hard work is probably underrated.
Well, I think, but if you're an intellect, for example, I'm not an intellect. I'm intelligent in other areas, like I'm street intelligent, or I'm business intelligent. But I think if you're intellectual, it makes learning easier. I mean, it still requires hard. It's like a good athlete. Some athletes are gifted. Doesn't mean they don't have. They just show up to the court and play professionally. They have to train every day, and they take what they're given and they make it even better, right? And I think similar, yeah.
So you said something there, intellect makes learning easy. I would almost go the other way around. When um, I've the only thing that I've found, if I introspectively go at what makes my brain work different from some of the people around me, the first thing is I was always told as a kid I'm fascinated by small things, and I could sit and watch ants for hours and break stuff down that nobody was the least bit interested in. I find things interesting. My whole life has been a challenge to narrow down my interests and
Mm,
actually do something,
mm.
right? I could have, I would love to live 100 lifetimes over, and I would do something different in each one. So it's fascination and interest with stuff uh, has made me curious, and I think the byproduct of that has been accumulating knowledge.
Yes, but so I'm fascinated with things and I love
Yeah,
learning. But so I never did well in school. I'm a terrible student.
yeah.
I just got by. But so I learned things. But when it gets down to the more technical, more challenging things, my eyes glaze over. Even though I'm interested in the topic, maybe it's just the way my brain functions. But I don't absorb that information well. I can look at it more from a bird's eye view and get sort of basic understandings of things. But when it gets into the fine details, I just don't absorb that well.
Yeah, it could be, some of it could be your sort of domain of expertise as well too. It's funny because when you said the eyes glazing over, my brother's a computer engineer,
Yeah.
and I've been trying to ask him, or I've asked him. He's lectured me now a few times at my request on crypto
Yes.
and how these cold wallets work
Yeah.
and hot wallets work. And I consider myself a reasonably intelligent person. When he talks about it, though, he just hits a point where my eyes glaze over, and
Yeah.
in this area, it's so foreign to me that once you start going on enough details, um, he just loses me,
Yeah.
But you could talk to me about an area where I have some degree of knowledge, and I can just dig deeper and deeper. I think it's being familiar with the territory.
Yeah.
And once you introduce enough new concepts, it's kind of hard to juggle them. You almost have to work with them for a while, establish, and then you can go a little further. And when you're in a new domain, for me, crypto, once you introduce about 3 or 4 new concepts, I've
Yeah.
lost the train. I've
Well,
lost
that's
my
a great topic we
orientation.
could talk about later because I'm interested in crypto. But
I'm
uh,
not the guy to talk to about it.
no,
We'll
I'm
get my
just so
brother on maybe.
I'm curious about it for sure. So going back to health and all that stuff, and your interests are varied, and mine are varied, but we do have some similar interests in health. And some of the things that I do and I'm interested in, I don't think you can be involved in because you're a doctor, and I step outside the bounds of what a doctor can do. And but I do believe in biohacking and just
Hmm.
learning how to live a better health span. Not a lifespan. Whatever number of years have left on this planet, well, that's up to God. But I'm me taking care of myself and all that. But I want to be healthy in all those years, and I
Yeah.
think you have a similar interest to be healthy for as many years as you're around, right?
Yeah. I don't think anybody wants to live old or and be unhappy
I
and
don't know. There's
ill.
this huge search for extending lifespan. And I'm like, why? You know, if I lived, let's say I'm lucky enough to live another 30 years, that would bring me into my 90s. Like, why would I want to stick around this planet any longer? My son will be old enough. He'll have met a woman, hopefully married, established, and, you know, maybe I'll meet a grandchild or two, maybe. But, you know, why would I want to stick around in this madness for any longer than I need to? You know, there's
Yeah.
purposes for me being here. Anyways, they're seeking to extend lifespan. I'm thinking, oh, that's a problem waiting to happen, because then healthcare is going to be an issue, and the cost of having people stick around longer is going to be an issue. And, you know,
Yeah. Well, if you can extend health span, I mean, I would love to extend lifespan as well too. Um, I'm a little different. I want to actually stick around this madness as long as possible.
okay.
Yeah, because and again, n- not past the point where I'm suffering all the time or in pain all the time or anything like that. And pain and chronic pain, something we might want to talk about later. But I do. I'm I love being on this planet and I love learning and uh, I also am in many ways not as pessimistic as some people. I do see some things in the world getting worse and I see threats and risks on the horizon, but I see a lot of things getting better. And I think we focus a lot on the stuff that's
Yeah,
getting
that's not why I
worse.
wouldn't want to
Yeah.
stick around. It's a purpose.
Yeah.
You know, what is my purpose for being around? You know,
Yeah.
so as a father, my purpose that's my number one purpose.
Yeah.
You know, is to serve my son, to help him, to usher him into manhood, to
Yeah.
usher him into, you know, whatever, and that's my number one purpose. And so that's a great reason for sticking around. That's a great reason for taking care of my health. You know, that's one of the reasons I got motivated to have health span, is to be healthy for my son, so that I can, you know, walk with him in his journey of adulthood. And then, you know, my mom, who's still around, she's 90 years old. And so that's her purpose for me being around, and until she's not. I'm sure she'll go before I do. And maybe there's a few other reasons, you know, the men I walk with in their life journeys. But really, there's only two people who rely on me. One is my mom, and the other is my son. And so after that, it's like, okay, there's things I can do that give me purpose, you
Yeah.
know, doing, working for charities or whatever. But, you know, for another 30 years, like, okay. For another 60 years, you know, if they could extend lifespan to 120, I'm like, I don't know. That's just a long time to be doing all. It's not the pessimism. It's like, why do I want to stick around so much? Like, why would I be afraid to die? You know, there's comes a point where I'm going to die. We're all
Yeah.
going to die at some point.
Yeah.
And so, you know, if there's not the reasons to stick around, I was like, well, okay, well, whenever then, you know, after that, I'm good. You know, I'm done.
So, um, the one thing I'd say is that's your view now.
Yeah.
What about when you're 95? Do you think you'll necessarily feel that way? And one of the things that I think I
I have
might,
no idea. You ask me in 30 years.
yeah, yeah, one of the things I might have detected, and you correct me if I'm wrong, and I hear this in a lot of people, is this perception that we're just going to be so much. It feels tiring. Like if you say, I live out to 110, I almost feel exhausted thinking about 110. That seems so far now.
It's
But at 110, if you're still full of energy and not tired, why don't you want to live to 111?
Well, as a Christian, as a believer in Jesus, a believer that I'm going to go to a much better place after this life. Like,
Yeah,
I see this life as a you know, I'm passing through this life to get to the next life. And
sure.
so to go be with my God, and to be in this amazing place of heaven, whatever that looks like and is more exciting to me than sticking around here. You know, like, I got to go
Yeah,
sometime. Why not? Like, and again, because I have reasons to stick around. You know,
yeah,
it's not tiring. I enjoy life. I enjoy
yeah,
every day. I'm full of energy. Well,
yeah,
like you, and, you know, at my age, I forget that I'm my age. You know, 64 almost now, coming in another month, and so yeah, if I feel the same way in 30 years from now, I'm still, you know, if I'm able to biohack myself to a great place of health in 30 years, yeah, maybe I'll shift my thinking. Maybe not, but it's like at some point I know I got to go. You know, it's not like I can stick around this planet forever. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you gotta go when you gotta go for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
But it's all about optionality.
Yeah.
At 90, you want to have the option to live to 91, and at 110, you want the option to live to 111.
I
In
don't
my
know. I
in
think
my
there'll be a point
opinion.
where I'm ready to go. I could be wrong. Again, let's check in 30 years from now.
Yeah, absolutely, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So back to health span and health in general. We were talking about BMI, and then we were talking about obesity, and we were
Hmm.
talking about these other ways of measuring body composition,
Yeah,
which is very different than BMI.
yeah.
And these are indicators of these are health indicators, right?
Hmm.
They're not the end all and be all, but especially around body fat, right? And
Hmm.
the level of body fat that we carry in our is an indicator of something in our health, right?
Yeah, so it's an indicator, but it is also a primary factor as well too. So, and I think we should talk about both. Body fat is an endocrine organ, so it's producing hormones,
Right.
and so in that sense, body fat has effects directly on itself, and the more you have, the more these factors are produced. But it is also a marker of what's happening metabolically as well too, and that's probably why when we start looking at risk, it's you don't necessarily need to be grossly overweight or obese to have some of these negative risks on health. Even lower levels of being overweight can be associated with this. Why? We're thinking about the quantity of body fat probably in this is my intuition, and I mean it is backed by some evidence, but I just want to say I'm not an expert in this area. um, is the directionality. So this is also why when someone is obese or overweight and they start to lose weight, a lot of the time those risks will decrease tremendously, even at the beginning of weight loss. So if someone's 80 kilograms overweight and they drop down to 79, you would think that's a trivial difference in terms of body fat or
Right.
body mass, but they've actually shifted their metabolism that they're now in a weight loss.
Right.
They're in the direction of weight loss,
Right.
and vice versa. If let's say I'm only 10 kilograms overweight, but then I just put on an 11th, I'm actually going the opposite direction.
Right.
So the body fat is also a marker of what's happening metabolically in the
Right.
body.
And metabolic syndrome, I think, is a huge issue in North America with our processed foods and sugars and all these things that all these additives in our food. I think it's become a massive issue. And the indicator may show itself in body fat, but it's a much deeper issue, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I will say there are some exceptions. So there are some studies showing that there are people carrying high amounts of body fat who are metabolically healthy.
Okay.
And there are people with low levels of body fat who are metabolically very unhealthy as well too. But
Is there a way to determine the health of like the metabolic health? Is there like
yeah,
tests that you can do?
yeah. So you'd be looking at some blood tests, looking at insulin sensitivity, looking at blood lipids. There's uh, you want to dig a little bit deeper than body fat percentage and body weight, but there are tests that you can do to assess that, and they're
Okay, so when
commercially
I get blood
available.
tests,
Yeah,
I'll get my insulin
yeah,
levels tested as well as my glucose levels
yeah.
and all the lipid tests and all that
Yeah,
stuff.
hemoglobin
Yes.
A1C, yeah, all your blood lipids,
Yeah.
things like that. Yeah.
And that's an indicator of metabolic health.
Yes, a window. That's a window into metabolic health. I won't say it's a comprehensive look at it, but it can give us a good
Gives
clue.
you a snapshot of
And
it.
if you start looking at desirable profiles on some of those levels, and then sitting at a healthy weight, uh, exercising well, eating well, you can talk a lot about someone's risk in terms of
Right.
morbidity and mortality.
So back to these blood tests, one of them, if you test you want to look for insulin resistance, right? If you're
Yeah.
overproducing insulin, you don't necessarily have to be overweight to overproduce insulin, but I think insulin resistance, which I think they're now calling type 3 diabetes or uh,
So it's insulin resistance is a characteristic of type 2 diabetes.
type 2 diabetes. Yeah.
Yeah, so the nickname type 3 diabetes is actually is a nickname for
Right.
Alzheimer's, because they're starting to see that Alzheimer's has, or I won't say starting to see, for a while now, Alzheimer's has been shown to have some characteristics of diabetes. So the brain is unable to metabolize glucose
Right.
in the manner that it needs to. And unlike a lot of other tissue in the body, The brain can only uh, function on two types of fuel. A lot of people think one type, which is glucose. The other one it can actually function on really well is ketones.
Right.
But if you're eating a diet that consistently has you consuming carbohydrates, you may be producing little to no ketones at all.
Right.
So if you have this dysfunction, your brain is unable to metabolize glucose, and you're not producing ketones, you're not taking ketones exogenously. In a sense, your brain is starving. And that seems to be one aspect of Alzheimer's. There's a number of aspects of Alzheimer's, though. It's not a simple condition.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I think I'm circling around
Yeah, we're going on all these tangents too.
it's tangents, but I think they're all kind of connected, in the sense that, this health span, so Alzheimer's is high, our general health, I think, in North America is very low, and there is obesity, overweight, and over obesity that's gone rampant in North America. There's metabolic syndrome that's gone rampant in North America. And I say North America, it's probably other countries in the world, but, North America, it's pretty obvious. And so they've developed these drugs now, peptides actually. One is semaglutide, which is, marketed as Ozempic, I think, and there's a couple other brands. And then another one's tirzepatide, which is marketed as Monjavi, I think, or Monjaro, or I don't know. Anyways, they're now becoming sort of mainstream. Ozempic sort of being the catch-up brand of these peptides that combat that tend to combat this metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance and these types of things, right? I know that I don't know how much knowledge you have around that, but
Yeah, so I got a little bit, and I think we talked about this. I'd love to do a deep dive on these at a time a little later when I've
yeah,
had a chance to really review the literature.
yeah,
My knowledge in this area is, I call it a tourist level knowledge. So I know a little bit, and I'm happy to talk about what I know.
yeah,
The one thing I will give my disclaimer, and that is, I'm not a prescribing physician, and
understand.
the other thing as well too is these drugs are approved for certain indications, and I, anybody who's interested in these, I think, needs to visit their physician to actually get
Of
good
course.
advice on this.
Yeah.
But after that, that being said, we can talk about it a little bit for sure. So there's the GLP-1 agonists.
Yes.
Okay, they actually go by there's two. All of these drugs, they have two names. So they have the ones for diabetes, and then they have another name for the same drug, marketed as obesity.
Okay.
So the semaglutide, which is a GLP-1 agonist, is marketed as Ozempic for diabetes, which was all it was
Okay.
originally approved for.
Okay.
But then they found that people were losing a lot of weight on this, and then it was marketed as, I think it's Wegovy. Again, I'm not
Oh,
I'm not big
Wegovy.
with the
Yes. Yes. Yes.
brand names, but
Yep.
I think it's Wegovy, and that's Ozempic. It's prescribed in a bit of a different dose, but it's the exact same thing. Then you've got tirzepatide, which is Mounjaro,
Manjaro. Yeah.
and that's the diabetes version. And then Zap something, Zappa
I don't know. I haven't
is
heard that
what
one.
is marketed as obesity. It's the same thing, tirzepatide. So, I'd prefer to talk about the chemical names, but so the
And they're peptides. They're not drugs. They're peptides.
yeah, they're peptides. Now, what is a peptide and what's a drug? So, a peptide is just a very short protein. It's a protein made up of usually a handful of amino acids.
Yeah.
And I don't remember exactly how large these are, but a lot of the
They
peptides,
range. They can range from just a few amino acids to many.
yeah. And we even call a growth hormone a peptide. And growth
Right.
hormone, I think, is up to about 150 amino acids.
Yeah.
So it's kind of pushing the limit of what we would call a peptide. You could also call it a small protein.
Yeah.
A lot of these peptides are really small. So a lot of the ones with the peptide therapies that are coming out now, they're very small. So in the neighborhood of 6 to 10 amino acids, and uh, proteins are really interesting because the complexity of them is, there's so much more complex than fat and carbohydrates. So
Right.
fat and carbohydrates tend to form simple structures. Fats tend to form chains. And as to actually carbohydrates and starch, you see these chains, and then they end up with these clumps of chains as well too. Very simple structures. Proteins is a whole, this is mind-blowing stuff. Proteins form these complex structures that once you start getting into these large size proteins into the thousands, tens of thousands, they actually are forming machines, really.
Mm.
It's not they're you can't think of them like nutrients anymore. These and some of these things that we think of that we call enzymes, they will literally take, one amino acid will bind something at the end, and this arm, this ligand will flip over. The substrate will get sucked into the complex. It will get stuff added to it, taken off, processed, and then another arm will swing out and present it on the other side. And that's a protein. It's one entire long molecule, but it's a complex structure. It's almost imagine if you were to take a modern factory, a car factory,
Yeah.
but make it out of one piece of material,
Yeah.
and you've got the whole assembly line. It's all made out of one string that's folded over. That's like the miracle of the proteins and complex enzymes in our body. So when we're talking about peptides that are 10 amino acids long, we're talking about different animals.
Right.
They don't have the same functionality,
Right.
but what they are a lot of the
They're
time,
more of
these
a
are
signaling agent.
exactly, they're signaling
Yeah.
molecules. They're getting attached to receptors,
Yeah.
and then those receptors are causing changes in enzymes and
Right.
other more complex structures that are making other things happen.
The reason I identified them as a peptide is because, and this again is my simplistic thinking. The difference between a peptide, like a shorter chain peptide, and a drug is that a peptide doesn't cause the body to react. It just gives an instruction for it to do something. Whereas a drug is a foreign substance to the body that the body does. It sort of reacts to it, and that's why often
Yeah.
it'll come with side effects as well.
So I don't break it down quite that way. I tend to
That's in
think,
my simplistic thinking.
yeah, no, no, no.
Stefan.
That's one way of breaking it down. I break things down a little bit differently. The first thing I tend to think of when I think of therapeutics, I tend to think of them as a supplement or a drug effect. And a supplement I think of as replacing something or providing something that you have relatively low quantities of. And it's a very naturalistic way of doing things. And oftentimes you're dealing with small quantities. So you're just supplementing to get up to a certain level. So
Right.
creatine.
Yes.
Uh, Creatine in general, you're taking in a supplemental manner. I don't think creatine is even going to have all that many effects in a drug-like manner in the way that I'm about to explain. You're just getting your creatine levels up
Yeah.
to an optimal level where all kinds of things can happen. Most vitamins you're taking in a supplement-like manner.
Right.
Whereas when I think of taking something in a drug-like manner, I think about taking it in a super physiological manner, taking it at a high dose, where it's having a therapeutic like dose effect at that time.
Yeah.
So there's a number of things that you could take in a supplemental manner, but you could also take in a drug-like manner. And I think you could make arguments that vitamin D is that way. So you can supplement vitamin D to get it up to a certain level when you're taking, anywhere from, 500 IUs to, 6,000 IUs or 10,000 IUs. That would be a supplemental level. But there are actually protocols for respiratory tract infections where you might be taking it for 150,000 IUs a day, which is a super physiological level. But what that does is actually having a quieting effect on the immune system and decreases inflammation, decreases hyperreactivity of some of the immune cells. And I would call that a drug-like effect. So is vitamin D a drug or is it a supplement?
I guess it
think
depends
can
how
be
you
both.
use it,
Yeah.
but again, anything like that, a drug, even if you're doing it for super physiological amounts, you can only do that for a period of time, and then the body doesn't do well. Like, vitamin D is stored in the body, and it becomes toxic if you have too much
At
vitamin D. It's
really
like,
high levels.
yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
right.
So
So you couldn't do that indefinitely. You can supplement vitamin D indefinitely if
sure.
you're maintaining a reasonable level, but you couldn't do these massive amounts of vitamin D or any other drug for a long period of time without negatively affecting the body.
Yeah. So now there's a concept. There's two. The way I think about it, there's oftentimes two ways that you have a negative effect from something. The first one is some sort of negative feedback loop. So something that is, it's impairing your own body's functioning.
Like a side effect. I mean.
So a side effect's another one. If you actually when we start getting into pharmacology, they're getting away from this term side effect,
Okay.
and they're starting to use the term adverse effect. And the reason is a lot of the negative effects are not actually a side effect of the drug. They're actually the main effect of the drug. You just may be doing too much of it that it's having a negative effect.
Right.
So the term side effect, an adverse effect is sort of the terminology that's being used more. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I
sure.
think
Yeah.
about it because it could actually be the main effect that's causing the problem. So let's say you're taking something in a low dose and it's creating a desirable effect,
Mm.
but you take too much of it and now it's causing a negative effect. It may be that same very effect that was causing the desirable effect that's now causing the adverse effect. It's not really a side effect of it. So
Right. But
I
if
know
you
it
took
sounds
it
like
in, if
semantics,
you took
but
the drug and it was serving its purpose. Let's take a
yeah,
statin.
yeah,
It lowers your cholesterol, right? It also lowers inflammation. So if I take a statin and it lowers my cholesterol, which is the goal of the statin, and to lower although they don't talk about as much, to lower inflammation, which
yeah,
is probably, I think, the more of the magic of a statin than the lowering of cholesterol. But there are also, potentially negative side effects, or
yeah,
adverse effects from lowering cholesterol.
yeah,
Effects in the brain because the brain is made up of cholesterol and it depends on cholesterol. So you could end up having negative effects in the brain. So is that a side effect? It's an adverse effect for sure
yeah.
of a drug that you're taking that's actually producing the effect of that. The purpose of that drug is
Yeah.
it's working, right? But it's doing these other things that are not necessarily good.
So that's actually a perfect example.
Yeah.
So the statins prevent our body from creating a side chain that's necessary to create cholesterol, a side chain called malevolonic acid.
Okay.
And that side chain, if you don't produce enough malevolonic acid, you're not producing enough cholesterol. And a couple negative things will happen. One is some of the adverse effects from the statins is actually the effect of lowering the cholesterol.
Yeah.
All of our membranes of our cells need cholesterol to stay
Yeah.
fluid. We're very sensitive to that. And our brain, which is highly has a lot of lipids in it.
Yeah.
Neurons are, especially the outer. The myelin sheath is very sensitive to reduced levels of cholesterol. The other thing that it also does is malevolonic acid is needed for assembly of some other very important molecules in the body. And some of these are actually potent antioxidants. So coenzyme Q10 is one
Yes.
of them. So there's really good evidence showing that chronic statin use increases a type of cardiomyopathy. And that is probably due to reduction of coenzyme Q10. And that's
Right.
directly because of stopping malevolonic acid production. So
And so
it's
they'll
an
tell you to
adverse
take
effect, but it's a main
CoQ10.
effect.
Yeah, take CoQ10 when you're taking statins, right? For
Absolutely.
that
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah. And that can probably reduce a lot of the risk associated with
So,
statins.
because of my heart issue, my doctors have tried to put me on statins for whatever since I had my heart surgery
Yeah.
7 years ago.
Yeah.
I won't take them. I haven't taken them.
Yeah.
But finally, and every time I saw a doctor, they say, "Go on statins. Go on statins." It's like giving out candy. And then I was at the doctor's once, and he said, "Well, let's put you on a small dose of a statin."
Yeah.
I said, "Okay." I said, "I'll try it.
Yeah.
I'll just try it." I didn't believe in them. I didn't want to do it, but I thought, "Okay, I'll just try it to see." I took the smallest dose. He said it was like a baby dose,
Hmm.
and within days, I just had this unbelievable brain fog. Like I couldn't function.
Yeah.
I remember I went to work that day. It was within 3 days of starting the statin. I went to work and I got to the office and I, I was, it was almost surreal. I was having trouble. I felt like I was in in a dream, And so
Mhm.
my brain had just gone so foggy. I actually turned around and went home that day. And then I stopped taking the statin. And I'm like, no way, I'm not touching this garbage. But that was a adverse effect. Maybe it was lowering
Yeah.
my cholesterol, but it was definitely an adverse effect
Yeah.
that was obvious to me. Like, it's like, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
call it a side effect, call it adverse. It was very adverse.
So you experienced an adverse effect, and there
Of a
are
very low dose of a medication,
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're sensitive, and maybe it was because you're sensitive to reduced cholesterol as well too. It might have been something else as well too. But there's um, do you know the term the number needed to treat? Have you ever heard
No,
that?
no.
So number needed to treat is a characteristic of drugs,
Yeah.
and it's the number of patients that you need to treat before one gets benefit.
Right.
This is
What
gonna
number
sound,
of patients you need to treat
yeah,
before one gets benefit?
before one single patient gets
It's
benefit.
like a statistic, is
It's
it?
a statistic.
Yeah.
So the number needed to treat, if you prescribe statins to a appropriately, which is patients in a high risk category,
Yeah.
which they've redefined a few times, and I'm not entirely up to date on this, but it used to be having two immediate family members with heart disease.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not talking about cousins and uncles and aunts, but siblings, parents, children who have had heart disease, or you yourself having, puts you in a high risk category. That means that was the generally accepted category to prescribe statins. It wasn't just based on blood lipid levels or anything. It was based on risk. And the number needed to treat, if prescribed properly, is about 99.
Not out of, sorry.
So you need to treat roughly 99 to 100 individuals
Yeah.
before one of them gets benefit. So you prescribe statins to 100 people, you actually appropriately, and you expect one of
So
those out of
1%
100.
success, basically.
You could look and say 1% success. Yeah, you could. That would be another way of
That's
describing
bizarre
it.
to me.
Yeah. So I think of these as a population-based medicine. If you
If you give it to enough
prescribe
people, it's
that
going
to
to,
enough people,
yeah.
you are ultimately saving some people's lives.
Yes.
So again, I'm not a cardiologist, so I just want to say that this
Yeah, this
is,
is not medical advice. This is
yeah,
more, yeah.
but it is a low yield medication. And if you have actually shown adverse effects, you're trading, you want to look and say, okay, well, I've demonstrated I essentially have 100% risk of having this. Presuming that this was controlled and that it was from the statin, you get that brain fog. You're looking and saying, I have 100% risk of having this brain fog because you're already experiencing it. And I have, maybe if I'm lucky, a 1% chance of actually getting benefit.
Yeah.
And what does that benefit look like as well, too? That benefit presumably is going to be an extension in lifespan.
Yeah.
But how much is that extension? Is it a few days? Is it a few weeks? Is it a couple of years?
Yeah.
And then what you might want to ask yourself is, could I achieve those same goals by doing other things?
Yes.
By eating better, by exercising
So there you
more,
go.
and some people quitting smoking.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I don't take any of the medications that they wanted me to be on beta blockers. They wanted me to be on blood pressure. Like if I was on all the medication, I would probably be a zombie. But, I don't take any of those medications. I just refuse.
Can I interrupt on one thing for a
Yeah.
sec? So you said I don't take any of these things. We have, when it comes to these medications, we have on many of them, like the statins, we have a plethora of research on the statins
Yeah.
as a single class of drug. We have very little research on their interaction in the body with other medications, a single other medication. So
Yeah.
as one, we have a good idea of what it's doing. Combined with two, with another medication, we have very little idea of what it's doing. You put three medications in the body at once, we have basically no data on it.
Yeah.
The interaction is totally unpredictable.
Well, I think of my grandmother. She's dead now, but they probably had her on, let's say, 10 different medications.
Yeah.
They kept adding medications, and it came to a point where she was almost comatose. Like she couldn't function anymore. And my brother and I went in, and we just started going through all like this bag. It was literally a bag full of drugs
Yeah.
that she would take every day. And we started looking at what they were and what they were used for, and we just started getting rid of some. And I'm not exaggerating. We got rid of probably half of them because they were old drugs that she probably didn't need anymore, and she came back to life. Like she became
Yeah.
very lucid again,
Yeah.
and it was amazing all the side effects, or
Sure.
interactions
Yeah.
of these drugs that
Yeah.
they were basically killing her,
Yeah.
and making her like her life useless. Like she couldn't get out of bed, and then she just came back to life.
Yeah. So, we have, when you're talking about 10 medications or more, we have no idea what that's doing in her body.
Hold on just one second. I hear a baby. Heck.
I thought it's not yours.
Not that I know of.
So you were talking about, was it your
My
grandmother who was
grandmother, who was
accumulating
on all these
medication?
medications, we pared it down to the bare minimum, and
Yeah.
she came back to life. Yeah.
So I see that with my patients as well too. Um, on intake, we'll do a detailed intake and we'll actually go through all the medication that they're on and what
Yeah.
they've been taking, particularly with a focus on pain, especially for the Veterans Affairs assessments. When we're doing these reports, they actually want to know what medications a patient's tried, how long they tried it for, what the effect was. So we'll go through medication by medication, and I was just shocked. I talk to these veterans who've been taking these medications for years, and I'll say, okay, so this particular medication, did you find it helpful? And they say, no.
Yeah.
I go, and you've been taking it for the last 10 years, and they haven't found it helpful. And then I'll go down medication number 2, be like, what about medication number 2? Have you found it helpful for the pain? I'm not really sure. Maybe, maybe not. And they've accumulated these long lists of medications, and you probe them. A lot of these patients with chronic pain have been from doctor to doctor to doctor.
Right.
Nobody knows what to do with them. So their GP isn't usually all that well suited to handle it. So they're sent off to neurologists. They're sent
Right.
off to rheumatologists,
Right.
physiatrists, sports MDs, everybody. And a lot of people will trial something. So they'll trial them on a medication. And then nobody else really wants to take them off of it because they weren't the ones that put them
Yes.
on.
Yeah. Of course.
So
Yeah.
they've accumulated these trials, and you
Yeah.
can actually go back through their health history and go, oh, I saw that neurologist back in the day, and he trialed me on this. And you know what? In defense of,
And even
that
as a patient, you might want to get, because you might think, oh, this is doing something really good for me, whether
Yeah.
you notice it or not. So you may not want to get off of it. It's like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but when it's not helping, it's a different story.
Yeah.
But someone, the specialist might have wanted to try them on it for a few months.
Yeah.
But then they didn't follow up with that specialist. That specialist forgot. And then everybody later on looks and goes, who put you on this? Oh, it was my neurologist. And I go, wow, I don't
want to mess
I
with
don't
the
want to step on
neurologist
your
here.
neurologist
Yeah,
toes.
yeah.
So patients tend to accumulate these
Oh my gosh.
trials, and you go through and they're not clear. A lot of the time, they're not even clear if any of them are helping,
Okay. So is there not we live in a computer age and everything's digital. And
Yeah.
is there not so you call those contraindications
Contraindications or interactions.
yeah. Is there not like a system that analyzes all these medications? And so this person, the medications they're taking is actually going to have a negative effect because they're have whatever, I can't say the damn word.
Yeah.
That they affect each other in a negative way.
So negative interactions.
Like, is there not a system? I go to the drugstore and I say, my doctor prescribed this, and it pops up saying, oh, this is actually not, you shouldn't be taking this when you're taking this. And
So pharmacists are actually really good with this to the extent that they can be good, to the extent that we have the knowledge. So if you have 2 medications that are completely contraindicated, your pharmacist will recognize it. There will be an alert in the system. The pharmacist will recognize it and talk to you about it. That's when we have the data to say that these 2 drugs, have opposing functions. They can't be taken together. And pharmacists are probably the best at that, picking that up. And I've met a lot of pharmacists who have been really switched on. But when you're talking about the interaction of someone taking 10 medications, and particularly if we're not talking about, we're not necessarily going to say any of these 10 medications are going to cause immediate cardiac arrest when they're taken together or something like that. But we're going to talk about they have a negative effect over a period of 10 years or so on. We don't have the data to put into the models or the systems. When you look at the amount of data we have on how one drug works, it's a miracle that we know how these drugs work as well as they do.
Yeah.
Now you put two together, and the complexity is not twice, it's actually to the power of two.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's infinitely more complex. You add three, it becomes infinitely more complex on top of that. It's to the power of three. You get 10 medications, you have the complexity of one medication to the power of 10.
Right. Right. Right.
You know, so the degree of complexity goes up infinitely, and we do not have the data. We don't have the research. We don't have the data to put into the models, into the systems, into the, AI, for example, can only work with the data that we give it.
Right.
And we don't have that data. There are some interesting things. So, they're starting to get into some of these models where you actually look at how structurally one drug will interact with another. And again, I know very little bit about this. It's not my area of research. They can actually model what the drugs are doing interacting, but that's a very limited way of looking at it. And one other thing is we're also dealing not with just the complexities of the drug, but we are dealing with the interaction of what they do when you put them into a complex system.
Yes.
And a human being is a complex system.
Highly complex.
It behaves in unpredictable ways.
Yeah.
And even let's say we're giving you three medications, and we're 1,000 years in the future, and I know exactly what those three medications do. I don't know what they're going to do in your body.
Yeah. Hey, yeah, I understand that. I mean, I love when I'm researching stuff and they'll say, okay, we've come to learn that this, whatever, medication does this, but we're not sure it has these other effects and we're not sure why. We can't really track, like they can't track through this very complex system of the human body and figure it all out.
Yeah.
But so I guess, and I'll say that the pharmaceutical companies are not motivated to have you take less drugs either. So it's got to come from either government or, it's got to come from somewhere other than the pharmaceutical companies. They'd be happy if you're taking 5 or 10 of their drugs.
Well, we're
getting. Sorry, I don't want to get into
no. The social side of things is, it's definitely worth talking about. But in some sense, I think what you're touching on, or maybe I'm extrapolating, is we're dealing with problems that are like artificial, new, created problems, and we're creating artificial, new ways of managing them.
Yeah.
And to go back to the complexity, when you're dealing with complex systems, it's impossible to know how they're going to predict with any degree of accuracy. But we do know when you intervene in a complex system, if you add something to that complex system, you have very unpredictable results. If you remove something from that complex system, you actually have more predictable results. So the same goes for health. If I can remove something from that system, I'm oftentimes better off and will have less desirable of less undesirable outcomes than if I try and add something to it. So instead of taking a medication to manage a high carbohydrate diet that's resulting in diabetes,
Right.
if I can remove some of the carbohydrates from the system, I know to a much greater degree of certainty how that system's going to respond. And it's going to respond in a manner that is going to be sort of more naturalistic.
Yeah.
If I add in a drug that's never been seen by that body or even been seen by any of that body's ancestors, I don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
So doing things that are in line with nature is always more predictable, and taking things out of the system is more predictable.
I'm with you on that. That's so when I said I don't take any of the medications they were throwing at me because, again, I didn't want to combine a whole bunch of medications. Plus, I'm just not really convinced I couldn't do it in a more natural way, So, increasing my fiber intake or, whatever it might be to lower my cholesterol, if that's my goal or whatever, I've been slowly learning what works for me. My blood tests are actually phenomenal and the scores are great. And, the doctors are happy. They think I'm taking the drugs and that's probably why, but that's not why,
you got them fooled.
Yeah, I got them fooled. And I don't tell them. They'll say, well, what are you doing? I'm like, unless it's a really good doctor, I'm like, I'm not going to get into all my stuff because then it's just going to be this crazy discussion of how I'm crazy and whatever, and I'm like, but you're happy. I'm happy. That's,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm healthy. That's good, So going back to this health span, and I want to talk about chiropractic because there's a connection there, right? I mean, there's a connection between chiropractic and the vagus nerve. I understand, right? And getting the vagus nerve to perform better is sort of has many effects on the body, health effects, whether it be HRV or other things. Am I correct?
So my HRV work with my PhD and my clinical work are a little bit separate. There's um, there's a lot of variety in the chiropractic profession, and I'm a little bit more of a, I won't say in strictly, but I focus more on musculoskeletal problems. So I'm dealing, if you think of it almost like a sports injury, it's not always sports injuries, but orthopedic injuries, musculoskeletal injuries.
But so my girlfriend who's got scoliosis and
Yeah,
it affects her. She's always in some level of pain.
yeah.
Is that your kind of field, or is it more about the
Yeah, no,
injuries?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I treat patients with all kinds of musculoskeletal pain, whether it's from an injury or whether that's, helping someone manage their pain from something like a scoliosis, which is not an injury. It's really more human variation than
Well,
anything.
it's human variation plus all the training that she did for Olympics and and gymnastics and then fitness, and I think it just made it exasperated things. It's you're working with this defect in the
Yeah.
spine, and it's just if you're not if she wasn't treating it, it's just making things worse.
So a scoliosis is a lateral curvature of the
Yeah.
spine. It's three-dimensional, but normally we have a sagittal curvature of the
Yeah.
spine front to back. Our low back lordosis, our thoracic kyphosis, our neck lordosis as well too. But people with the scoliosis have a side to
Yes.
side curvature of the spine, and
Yeah, but just on that note,
yeah,
so I bought one of those Therabody massagers.
okay, yeah,
Really
like a
nice, like
Theragun type, like
yeah, it's
a
like a really
percussion
high end
massager.
one
Yeah,
with heat and all that. And so I'll be giving her a massage, and I have to track with her spine. Like
yeah,
I can't
yeah,
go straight up and
yeah.
down
You can see
because
it. Yeah,
sometimes I'm like I hit her spine.
yeah.
If I go straight up and down.
You have to adapt to her
Yeah,
spine shape.
yeah,
So, one of the things about a scoliosis is the spine is not in an optimally efficient position.
right.
So, if you were to sort of, or a very common thing is patients with the anterior head carriage, they're having to exert a lot. I don't know if you can see that, but they're having to exert a lot more effort to keep their
Yeah,
their posture upright when they're
yes,
shifted so forward. Well, the same thing's happening with scoliosis. If I've shifted off to the side, I'm having to exert a lot of effort to
right.
keep myself up. You're a little less efficient. So the muscles end up working a heck of a lot harder
Yes,
posturally. A scoliosis, most of the time, there's a couple exceptions, is not acquired. So it's not because we did something. And we do see increased scoliosis with some sports. So swimming is one of them, but we don't know that it's necessarily the swimming that's causing it.
no, but it made it worse. That's it's
Probably not. Okay, probably not. Most of the scoliosis that you're going to see are going to be uh, of two kinds. And idiopathic adolescent scoliosis. So idiopathic means the idiots don't know what causes it, right? It's unknown cause.
right.
And it just happens as we grow. Some people grow asymmetrically through puberty. And they may have had a little bit of a curvature prior to that, but then it gets accentuated with puberty. We see this a lot in tall, skinny people. But why are we seeing it? Maybe because they're tall,
So if
that
you
it has a chance for that scoliosis to get larger. If they were shorter, it would be less,
so if you
right?
took an 11-year-old,
Yeah,
right, and started doing intensive training in gymnastics,
yeah.
where there's you're doing things to the body that it's not normally
Yeah.
designed to do. Could that bring on scoliosis, in other words, like, or could it be that this person had scoliosis and that just made it way worse? Because that's basically what happened with Vonda. She was taken to training camp at age 11, and
Yeah.
they were basically getting her ready for Olympics, right? And the training routines were just brutal.
So the evidence, to my understanding, is no.
Okay.
So you're actually not going to cause a scoliosis with that. But there's another factor, and there's a correlation there though. And people who are involved in gymnastics, dance, a couple other things have a high degree of flexibility,
Yes.
and they oftentimes, um, uh, they well, there's actually a high incidence of a group of conditions we call Ehlers-Danlos syndrome as well too. I met a friend. We actually had a meeting while he was outside waiting for his daughter to do a dance class, and um, I was joking saying that this is not just a dance competition. An Ehlers-Danlos convention.
Yeah.
Because people who are very flexible get into things that they excel at, just as all of us do, and they oftentimes end up in dance. They end up in gymnastics, or they end up in yoga. I see a lot of patients in yoga. It's not that the yoga or the dance or the gymnastics necessarily makes them flexible. There may be some of that, but there's definitely a strong effect of that they are flexible, therefore they do these things. And when you have a high degree of connective tissue laxity, there's also a really good chance, there's a higher chance that you're going to develop a scoliosis.
I see. She's very flexible. I mean,
Yeah.
even now, like she'd be standing at the entrance to in a door frame, and
Yeah.
she'll just bring her foot up and put it up here,
Yeah.
like while she's standing straight, and not with any effort. It's like just goes up here, and
Yeah.
like, oh, it's crazy. It's like,
Yeah. So to hazard a guess,
I would have to. I would tear my groin trying.
Yeah. So
Even get close to that.
I wouldn't even get close.
No.
Yeah. We're not, but we're not all built like that. And that's
Yeah.
actually, touches on something. I see a lot of people, flexibility has become a societal virtue. And it's almost like people feel guilty for not stretching. People
Yeah.
feel guilty for not being flexible. And there's a lot of human variation, and we need to respect that variation. And there's certain things like CrossFit and yoga
Yeah.
that isn't always the best in respecting that variation.
Yeah.
And um, to go back to flexibility for a second, not everybody's built to do the splits.
Yes.
But if you're not built to try and do the splits, and you try, or to do the splits, and you try and do the splits and keep working on it,
Yeah.
a lot of time you're going to injure your hips.
Yes.
And I see this. I see people coming in with hip injuries from doing stuff that requires a high degree of flexibility.
Right.
And I'm looking at them almost from an evolutionary point of view and going, you're not meant to have your feet high up in the air.
Right.
You're built like a deadlifter.
Yeah.
You're not built like a yogi. And another big one I see is shoulder injuries. So I see a lot of people. And don't get me wrong, I don't want to diss CrossFit too much, because I think they've done some incredible things, and especially when it comes to group exercise, nobody's done it better than CrossFit, motivating people with that community. But I have seen a lot of patients coming back with problems, specifically with all the overhead work.
Yeah.
And we categorize shoulder shapes in three different ways. There's the top, the roof of the shoulder. The acromion process can either be sort of slightly curved down like this, it can be hooked down, or it can be flat like this. And depending on that shape, these people with that type of acromion, they will not impinge their rotator cuff tendons.
Right.
So they don't develop rotator cuff tendon tears with overhead work. These people curve down, they do it for a few weeks and they start getting rotator cuff tendinopathies because they're impinging those tendons with all the overhead work.
Right.
These people, their shoulder can be perfectly fine, perfectly healthy. They do one set of military press and they're getting shoulder pain.
Right.
But there's very little appreciation in some of these exercise circles for those variations.
Right.
And a lot of the time, those results are blamed on the patient. So the patient is told, well, it's because, you only come once a week. If you came 3 times a week, you'd have the scapular stability and you wouldn't have this problem, and you need to stretch more and things like that. And I think in some of these areas, we don't do a good enough job of appreciating the variation between humans. Some people are meant to do a lot of overhead work. They're designed to do a lot of overhead work. Some aren't. Some people are designed to do the squats. Some aren't. Some people are really built for endurance sports. Other people break down very quickly with endurance sports, and they're more meant for strength.
Yes, I've seen that. I do hill training in the summers and
Yeah,
with groups, and
yeah,
there's this one guy, and he could literally run up and down that hill nonstop. His cardio system is just insane, and he's
yeah,
like, and he's ready to go more.
yeah,
I do like a couple of runs up the hill. I mean, I'm older, but even some of the younger people,
yeah,
it's a stretch to go up 3 times, 4 times, 5 times.
yeah,
Well, this guy could just like he doesn't seem to ever run out of steam, and he's not a super athlete.
yeah,
He just happens to have that. I like the Stefan. I like that you have this sort of view of the human body with variation in mind. Like it's not one size fits all, one answer fits all kind of thing. And I think that's really important. I'm a strong believer in that. I could take a peptide, and my good friend Eli takes a peptide, and they have two different effects. One
yeah,
has no effect on one person and an effect on the other person, or a medication, or whatever, right? So I like this idea of I'm in diet. When people say, "Well, what do you eat?" I say, "Well, what I eat doesn't really matter. It works for me.
yeah,
That's the diet that works for me. I am a carnivore mostly, and
yeah,
it really works well for me. But it would be awful for you,
yeah.
and keto may be good for you, and may not be good for the next person. So I like that you have sort of this view of the human body with these variations in mind. It's not one size fits all.
Ever since, well, actually, even before, even in high school, I saw the power of looking at things in the light of evolution. And when you interpret things in there's a saying that nothing in biology makes sense except under the light of evolution. And when you start looking at how individuals are adapted to different environments,
Hmm.
and then also the key to survival is variation. I mentioned optionality earlier, but the key to survival is variation. You're not exactly the same as all your siblings. We don't clone. And back in the day when, we weren't all surviving, some of those traits would have significant advantages over others.
Yeah.
And it's in the best interests of the genes, if they want to perpetuate themselves, and if individuals are going to perpetuate themselves, to have a little bit of variation. If you have all the exact same offspring, well, something's going to come along and they're all going to die.
Yeah.
Or if you're lucky, they're all going to survive, but eventually they're all going to die. If you have enough variation, what happens is you create some that are suited for some environments and some that are suited for others. And humans are like this. We're like this when it comes to those superficial features, like what I was talking about some orthopedic features, about hip range of motion, flexibility, things like this. But we're also like this in our cognitive features, our metabolic features. Some of us retain sodium more than others
Right.
in areas. Okay, specifically when the slave ships were coming over from Africa. They were treated so poorly, and they were starved of water and electrolytes as well too. And the few that were fortunate enough to survive crossing the ocean were the ones that had the genetic variation that allowed them to hold on to their sodium
Right.
and hold on to their fluid.
Right.
And the offspring, the descendants of those people, have a much higher rate of hypertension now because they hold on to their sodium and they
Right. Right.
retain a
Right.
high blood pressure. But what actually helped our ancestors survive is what's increasing morbidity now. Um, Even in terms of variation, in terms of our cognition, some of us are more creative than others,
Oh yeah.
and some of us are more disciplined than others. And it's
Yes.
not a dichotomy, but there are variations
Oh
there.
yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah. I think of when someone's asked, okay, you're 90 years old. What's the secret of your health? And
yeah,
they'll say something, and people say, okay, well, that's the answer. Well, they'll know that's the answer for
for
you.
you, yeah,
And I'd say, I mean, obviously, this is a pretty basic example, but smoking's bad for you. But you can have someone who smoked a pack a day, and they're 95 years old, and they're just doing fine.
yeah,
And I'll say, well, that's just they're a genetic marvel, but statistics show that smoking will cause
yeah,
cancer.
yeah,
And yes, but everybody's different, and so this person could smoke a pack a day, eat Skittles every morning for breakfast, and somehow just be fine. And but they're not the average, and
Yeah.
because there's such a huge variation in our
Yeah.
DNA and the way we're made, right? And I love that. I love that approach. So going back to chiropractic, because I'm fascinated. You got into chiropractic for a reason, like, or was it just something? Was it something your father did, or like why did
No,
you do
so
it?
I've no family in chiropractic. I had a really good experience with a chiropractor when I was younger.
Okay.
Um, it was a relatively simple problem I had. I remember it was high school and we just finished wrestling and I had a back spasm and just absolutely the most severe pain I'd
Yes.
felt at that age in my life and felt I couldn't walk. I just because the pain was so intense, had to be helped out to the car, and then um, someone drove me home, and then I went to my mom's chiropractor, and my chiropractor adjusted me, and immediately the pain was gone, and I was
Oh,
like,
nice.
"Whoa, this is magic,"
Yeah, 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 yeah.
and that got me interested in that this was something that I would potentially want to do. And then, going through university, I was sort of sitting, do I want to become a chiropractor? Do I want to become a medical doctor? It was the deciding between those two. And I did what was probably, I think, I got to credit myself, a reasonably smart thing to do. Um, I actually visited a bunch of chiropractors and a bunch of MDs and sort of, asked them questions and sort of get a sense of what their lives were
Right,
like and how they enjoyed their work. And um, the chiropractors I visited were all just super enthusiastic,
right.
loved what they did, seemed like they had these wonderful lives. And the medical doctors I visited seemed a little bit more, depressed. I don't want to generalize, but the ones I visited, they weren't as enthusiastic about what they did. They seemed a little bit more downtrodden. Now, in hindsight, after working with a lot of medical specialists, I realized I made a mistake. I visited general practitioners because that
Okay.
was, to me, what medicine was.
Right.
And since then, I've had the opportunity of working with a whole bunch of specialists, whether it's neurosurgeons, orthopedic surgeons, physiatrists, sports MDs, and I realize the specialists a lot of the time are very motivated and enthusiastic about what they do. And don't get me wrong, since that time, I've also met a whole bunch of wonderful and enthusiastic and inspired GPs as well too.
I think the challenge
Yeah.
of a GP, especially, is this whole idea of variation, right? So they're very highly regulated, like you're
Hmm.
regulated, and uh, there's a sort of a okay, well, if this person has this issue, this is the solution, right?
Yeah.
This is the medication.
Yeah.
I think you can't really step outside of a box, and I know that you, in some ways, but as a chiropractor, you sort of have the ability to look at the person as an individual and do treatment for the individual rather than, oh, this is the one thing I do for everybody. I'm
Yeah.
thinking, and that's where maybe more joy comes out of a career, is where you have the ability to really focus on the person rather than, okay, this is the one fix for everybody.
Yeah. So,
I'm gonna get you, hold on
yeah.
though. I
Sorry.
have to go to the washroom now
Okay.
again,
Yeah.
so
All
I'm
right.
gonna take another break.
Yeah.
How are we doing for time there, James? Well, the way you look at things, look at this sort of
The whole body.
variation
Yeah.
in each human being, which is great. I think it's great. And then with chiropractic, you get to chiropractic. It's called chiropractic, right? You
Chiropractic. Yeah.
have that sort of flexibility to change what you do based on the individual, right? Whereas I find with a lot of medical doctors, like GPs and stuff, they are, they have a book, and they're regulated by the College of Physicians and Surgeons. And if you got this, you take, here's your three options
Hmm.
of the medication you give. And so there's not a lot of ability for thought process, other than it's almost like robotic. But it's just my view. That's how I see doctors. I don't get along with many doctors, and
Yeah, so I actually do get along with medical
well,
doctors
good.
really well, and
That's
I've
good.
I've spent,
You're
when
my counterbalance. So,
when I was, and again, I said I've had a little bit of an odd career as a
yeah.
chiropractor. When I was in Botswana, I worked in the Department of Orthopedic Surgery, and my immediate colleagues were orthopedic surgeons and neurosurgeons, and um, even currently now, I work in a very multidisciplinary environment. Our clinic in Ottawa, we have this multidisciplinary team that includes three medical doctors, medical specialists, and I've been doing this 20 years now, and I have been working in multidisciplinary environments long enough that I don't know how well I do just on my own anymore.
Mm.
I like being part of a team because I have a tool set that can help certain patients, but I'm mature enough and humble enough to know that there's a lot of patients I can't help, or they need something else,
Right.
or at least need, they need some kind of other care while I'm working on them. I've been doing this long enough. I know my limitations a lot better than when I first started.
Yeah.
And I actually co-manage a lot of patients with our MDs, with our physiotherapist, mental health as well too,
Yes.
specifically. So, and that's some of those are areas where I'm not all that competent and don't feel comfortable, or, you know, especially the mental health side. I got to be careful even of the liability, but we have a really multidisciplinary practice where we work well together. A lot of clinics, they do lip service to being multidisciplinary, but what they really are is a facility that has a whole bunch of practitioners working in silos, and
Right.
they share a roof.
Right.
We are a team,
Okay.
and our patients appreciate that. And especially, as I mentioned, with my military patients, a lot of them are complex.
Right.
They're oftentimes coming in with multiple musculoskeletal injuries, uh, oftentimes traumatic brain injury,
Right.
and also mental health issues as well too. PTSD being one of the
Oh yeah.
leads,
Sure.
and I can't handle all that, and I wouldn't want to. And in the early days of my career, I might have tried, within my scope, and it's overwhelming. You might have guessed, nutrition is a passion of mine.
Yeah.
And when I first graduated, I thought I was going to be using nutrition in my practice a lot, and I
Mm.
haven't. And it's not because I don't think it's important. It's not because, I'm not interested in it, or I don't think my patients can benefit from it. It's because I couldn't do it all. I
Right.
couldn't do it all in my practice. I had my hands full with dealing with what I'm dealing. Right now, I deal with musculoskeletal conditions. I actually assess and triage our concussions. I do a lot of work around vestibular issues. Um, I do acupuncture as well too. Uh, I'm leaving out a few things, but I can't do the nutrition on top of that. I can't, even if it was in my scope, I couldn't manage the mental health. It's overwhelming. It's
Yeah.
overwhelming.
Yeah.
So I need the team, and we have a
And yeah, I'm
really
sure your
great team.
patients appreciate the fact that you're focused on the things that you can focus on, and you give them the attention they need
Yeah.
in those
Yeah.
areas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's good. So we were talking about why you got into chiropractic. You said you visited with doctors, you visited with chiropractic uh, doctors, and then you decided you thought they were happier, and so you went that route. And you said, but no, in hindsight, that's not necessarily the case. You would maybe medical doctor would have been something you would have.
yeah, so at the time, I think I had a limited sample of a handful of GPs
Yeah.
who I probably visited them during the winter months or something as well too. They were, not at their highest point, but um, in hindsight, I should have visited some specialists, and medical specialists. I found a lot of the time are very interested in what they're doing,
Right.
passionate. Now, I don't want to generalize, not all of them, but that group is, I find, a little bit more enthusiastic.
Yeah. My heart surgeon, when I
Yeah,
had heart surgery, he was very enthusiastic, and
yeah,
I think he loved what he did. I mean, he
yeah,
didn't love that his patients were sick, but he loved what he did, and
yeah,
he could tell he was just, he was proud of what he did, and
yeah.
yeah,
And it's, the MDs that I work with, look, sometimes they can be tired, but they love what they're doing, and they're helping a lot of people. And again, this is working in this team environment. I see, sometimes what I would call near miracles coming from some of the other treatment rooms. I would never say that about anything I do, but I can say it about my colleagues, that they will find something that I hadn't even contemplated or hadn't even
right,
thought about. The other thing is also the tremendous amount of wisdom and experience the people that I have work with. The one of the specialists I work with has a long experience in the military himself, and he knows what these veterans and soldiers have gone through, and he has just a tremendous amount of insight, and he'll with that insight and that wisdom, he's able to unlock certain things that, they're not even on my radar.
So it sounds like you work with a really special group of people, which is wonderful. But when I say I don't get along with doctors, it's
Yeah.
not because they're doctors I don't get
Yeah.
along with
Yeah.
them.
I know what you
I just
mean.
had
I know
bad
what you mean.
experiences with
Yeah.
doctors,
Yeah.
in terms of more so that they weren't interested in hearing what I had to say about
Yeah.
what I knew about my body and what I knew was going on. It was more of it was a one-way conversation, and there was a bit of arrogance there, maybe.
Yeah.
And so it's not that they're doctors that I don't connect.
It's the
It's
industry.
the doctors that I dealt with, that many of them, and there's a handful that I loved. My unfortunately, my last doctor, he was my current doctor, and he moved from the clinic I was going to, and I don't know where he's moved to, but he was probably the most amazing doctor I ever worked with,
Yeah.
because he was interested in knowing me,
Yeah.
what was individual to me, like kind of like your approach.
Right.
I wasn't just a human being who needed to be treated. It was like, okay, Doug's got this, and this,
Yeah.
and how do we get there?
Yeah.
And so I really had a great respect for him.
So what you're saying there a moment ago, I think it's, you could almost create a metaphor between religion and medicine. And I'm not calling medicine a religion, not at all. But, a lot of times people say with religion, they might love their pastor and they love their religion, but they hate what the church has done historically.
Right.
And I think you can almost say the same thing with medicine. You might love your medical doctor or some specific medical doctor. And, I don't think, medicine, I mean, has brought us so many benefits in the modern age. I don't think there's too many arguments against medicine as a whole, but the practice of medicine and the industry and how it's been applied has problems.
Yeah.
And the industry of medicine, I think, has problems. A lot of MDs are feeling the weight of the regulations now, what they can say and what they can't say. They're practicing within very limited bounds for fear of medical legal issues. The industry itself has been it's not distinct from big pharma, like, and it's not distinct from the government now anymore either, and big food. These are all integrated into sort of almost one mess. They're hard to tease apart. I think if medical doctors could practice the way that they wanted, and we had a free flow of knowledge and researchers were able to research what they want to research rather than just researching where the money is and
Yeah.
where the
Well,
the
most
incentives
research
are. I
is,
think I
is
think medicine would be absolutely wonderful, and I hope that we can go more that direction, because I think medicine and the funny thing, I'm not a medical doctor, but I sort of almost lump myself in there and I say healthcare. Uh, I think healthcare could be absolutely wonderful, and I hope that we can make the about face that's needed to head that direction in the future.
yeah. Yeah, we have so many advancements in understanding of the body, although it's still very complex. And there's, for every one thing we learn, there's probably 1,000 things we don't know. But you know, the problem is a lot of what we've discovered isn't profitable to the pharmaceutical companies, and most research is funded by pharmaceutical because they have the money, right?
Yeah,
And so, if it's not profitable to the pharmaceutical companies, there's very little interest in adding that to the repertoire of what we're interested in doing,
yeah,
right? And I think that's really unfortunate because we have made so many advancements in understanding, whether it be hormone replacement therapy
yeah,
or peptides or whatever it might be, that the research chemicals, and
yeah,
if they don't fit within the bounds of something that can be patented, so the pharmaceutical companies have figured out how to patent tirzepatide and
yeah,
Ozempic for specific uses rather than the peptide itself, because the peptide,
yeah,
anybody can make a peptide.
yeah,
So now it's now mainstream, right? And that's great. And if they could make money, if we could somehow get the pharmaceutical companies to make money on everything that
hmm
we've learned about, how to treat the human body, then it would become more mainstream. But maybe there's another way to get there. I don't know.
yeah. So you've touched on a big dilemma, and that is the whole sort of, will pharmaceutical companies do the research that's needed to create novel substances if they can't patent it and make massive amounts of profits.
Yeah.
And the argument certainly used to be that the patent protects the pharmaceutical company, so they'll actually invest in research and development.
Right.
And there's good evidence to suggest that that's the case. And in certain areas where something's not patentable, you see that there's just not an interest in developing new therapeutics. But there's other areas where there's no interest in developing new therapeutics as well too, for other reasons. I don't know exactly how it's handled, but I think that we're going to need some kind of overhaul of the entire system, and a whole new incentive system needs to be created moving forward in the future,
Yeah.
because protecting patents for as long as they are and the massive profits are not necessarily great either. But there's other issues as well too, and that is, in the early stages of a drug, the only ones who have the money to finance the research are the pharmaceutical
Yes.
companies. So you've got these conflicts of interest that are happening, and
Yeah.
you
I'm
know,
researching my own drug.
yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, yeah,
which I
yeah.
hope to make money on.
Exactly. So the data is being gathered by the people who are selling it to us as well too. So again, going back to, even if we had all the data, well, where's all the data coming from? And when you have substances that independent research is done on, almost straight across the board, the results don't look anything near what the drug-funded results look like. So
Yeah.
so the incentive system, I think, is a little bit screwed up, and I think it's gone to the limit. We're seeing the effects of that. One other thing that is the research publication as well too. And I mean, we can talk about that at length, but there's a lot of biases in how research is published, and
Right.
it's not just the ones that we might think about, like industry bias, but there's a bias in terms of publishing results that are only positive.
Yeah.
So we end up publishing, and this goes beyond pharmaceuticals. We publish things that are interesting, and if it turns out that something didn't do anything, or the results were mediocre, well, a lot of the time that won't get published. But if we want a comprehensive idea of what something's doing, we need all the data,
Yeah.
not just the one study where it showed it had a big effect. We need the other 9 studies that showing it had no effect or a reverse effect, and we need to pool that data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So off we could get into conspiracy theories, but between pharmaceutical companies and that whole the sort of the pharmaceutical complex that is very powerful, and then the food industry, which is also very powerful. You know, I'm old enough to know that I remember that back in my younger years, Canada was sort of the place that people looked to for our healthcare system.
Yeah.
It was sort of the gold standard of healthcare, and I would say that our healthcare system now is not the gold standard. I'd be surprised if we're the bronze standard, let alone anything else.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is because of industry. Industry has sort of taken control of our health, and we're being lied to a lot. The whole Canada Food Guide is a joke. I'll say that 1,000 times. It's just bizarrely a joke. And the amount of sugars and processed foods, and we talked about this right at the beginning, is these are being marketed to us, and we're being told it's okay. And there's no regulations against it. Going to Europe was really fascinating because they do have a lot more regulations around food than we do
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
and the effect of the food. So my girlfriend is not celiac, but she's gluten intolerant,
Gluten intolerant. Yeah.
and so here she can't eat bread or pastas. It messes her. There she could eat it endlessly and with no
Yeah.
negative effect, and I think Canada's kind of fallen apart at the seams that way, that we're industry driven rather than purpose driven.
Yeah, I think North America might be a little bit more industry driven than Europe in that
Yeah.
sense.
I mean, it's the whole world's industry driven,
To
and
some extent,
I'm a
yeah.
capitalist, so it's not like I'm
Yeah.
against capitalism. It's the effects that capitalism can have on people's health. Our healthcare system gets strained because people are less healthy, so it just requires a lot more money to keep people alive.
So now we're back to the artificial solutions for fixing artificial problems,
Yeah.
right? So North America, and again, I only know the history a little bit, but A lot of our food recommendations started originally with some of the agricultural bodies, the
Yes.
protecting farming. So
Yes.
we were producing, at least in the US, they were producing massive amounts of corn. And then that's why you started seeing grains and stuff
Yeah.
at the top of
Top of the
the
list, man.
food pyramid. It should probably be right at the bottom,
Or nowhere. Or
survivor
nowhere.
or nowhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. The, so, it was maybe some of the cart leading the horse. And I think it would be okay if we were honest about it and if we were saying these are the guidelines to protect our farm
Yeah.
industry. They're not our guidelines to protect our health.
No.
Europe, their history is a little different. Their farming uh, was more. They had their traditional farming. It was already in place. So there wasn't this massive growth in farming like what we saw in North America. So I don't think there was as big or rapid a growth in the lobbies. So their focus was largely on health. It wasn't necessarily on expanding, farm profits as what was happening with the burgeoning industries in North America.
Yeah.
And Europe has always, I feel like in many ways has always been a little bit more health conscious as well too. But to go specifically to the wheat, they're growing different strains of wheat from what we have, right? So we
Well,
are used
it's a bit of a joke in Canada because if you buy organic wheat, whatever, it's not true because
still GMO
it's
probably.
all GMO.
Yeah,
All our grains are GMO in
yeah,
Canada, and so it's not organic. It's an organic version of a GMO, right?
yeah. So when
Again, if they were honest, they'd say all our grains are GMO.
yeah,
Okay, now
yeah.
here's your bread.
So there's so much dodgy terminology
Yeah,
in sort of nutrition. I remember one of my favorites was the no added sugar. So if you ever see an orange juice that says no added sugar,
yeah,
there's an interesting thing they do there. So they actually take an excess of oranges, just like we have an excess of milk and so on, and they dump it and put it into other products. But they have an excess of oranges. So what they do is they actually take the fruit sugar out of the orange, they extract it, and then they add it to other orange juice. But because it's in that fruit, it's an isolated sugar that they pulled out of the orange, but it came from the orange. It's, according to our guidelines, classed as a part of the orange. So
I love
they
it.
have not added sugar. So no added, like orange juice with no added sugar may very well have sugar added to it, but
But
they've
it's the
just by
orange
this
is
funny
sugar, so it's
regulatory
it's a
thing.
natural
Yeah.
sugar for the orange.
Another one I look at is whenever you see something that says natural,
Yeah.
like natural has no standing in terms of, there's no definition of it.
No, I'll tell you the best
So when
one.
somebody puts natural on it, it doesn't mean anything. So they're probably, you want to be alert to that they're maybe trying to deceive you
Oh yes,
already.
they're all. I'm very. No, I read labels now to the every
Yeah,
little detail. If I don't know what something is, I won't buy it.
yeah,
But my son and I were shopping one day, and it's hilarious because we looked at a product that said all real ingredients.
yeah, yeah,
We're like, what the fuck does that mean?
yeah,
Arsenic is real, but
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it was
That's
just a
good. That's
marketing
good.
play.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
real
yeah,
ingredients. Oh, that's got to be good.
yeah,
It's all real. Oh my gosh. The other thing I find with, and we're off on a tangent again, but is the labels when they have sugar, and so they found a way now because it's all labeled by volume, right? Quantity,
yeah,
and so they'll break sugars down into three different kinds of sugar, and so it could shift down
yeah.
further into the list. It could be seventh instead of first. But if you combine the three different sugars,
Oh
one's
yeah,
high
yeah, yeah,
high fructose corn syrup, and then whatever, some other form of sugar and organic cane sugar. But if you combine the three, it would be number one on the list. But
yeah.
broken into three different things, it's way down on the list, right?
Wow, that's neat. Actually, I hadn't thought about that
Yeah,
one.
it's
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's mind-boggling, So,
yeah, yeah.
but you can just look at the sugar content.
Yeah, and I just listened to your interview with Nikki Feltz.
Yeah, Nikki's great.
Yeah, she is great, and she mentioned I think that there's 250 names for sugar or something
Yeah, yeah,
on products.
yeah. It's
I don't
it's
don't quote
amazing.
me on that, but yeah,
It's unbelievable.
it's almost as if that whole regulation is intended to deceive.
It is
You
intended.
know,
Okay, I'm going to say it's intended to deceive.
yeah,
I think there's, money is a huge motivator. Bible says the love of money, not
yeah,
money itself. The love of money is the root of all evil.
yeah,
And I think we have a great love of money, and corporations they're, when they're public corporations, they
Yeah.
have to produce they have to produce money for their shareholders. That's
Yeah.
the end. That's the bottom line. The
Sure.
shareholders are not interested in,
Yeah.
maybe they are
And
interested in,
ruthlessly. Yeah.
and ruthlessly,
Yeah.
So we are very corporately driven. And again, I'm a capitalist, but not at the cost of human life, right? So,
You can be a capitalist without being a crony
yeah.
corporatist. Yeah.
Oh, so there you go. Well, that's a whole nother, that's a whole nother discussion for,
Yeah. So, one of the other differences between Europe and North America, I think, is that, or certainly between the US and Canada, is that Canadians were very trusting of authority.
yes.
And, I would include myself as part of that, or up until, recent years. And I think part of the reason is in Canada, we've always had good reason to trust our authorities.
Yeah.
For the most part, they've always done well by us.
Yes.
And, it almost didn't matter who was in power in the government.
I always felt Health Canada was trying to protect us.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas I assumed the FDA was corrupt.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You always look across the border and see
Yeah.
how much worse things are. Um, and there's Occam's razor, right? So Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is often the best.
Yeah.
There's another razor called Hanlon's razor, and this is one I learned a few years ago. And it's I'm going to paraphrase, but it's never assume malfeasance or evil when incompetence or ignorance will suffice.
Yeah.
And I look at with some of the things that some of our authorities and corporations are doing, and it's not. I don't think they're necessarily intentionally evil. I think a lot of the time I think it's negligence and naivety a lot of the time that's happening. But I know I sort of dug a little deep there. But we've Canadians, I think in the past had good reason to trust authority in our country, whether it's our governments, whether it's our bureaucracy, or whether it's the media.
Yeah.
I think for the most part, I never felt like our media was. I always thought it was balanced and portraying things well. And look, I say that that's past tense. That's
Yes.
past
Yes.
tense.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And I don't know how long it's been going on, but over the last few years, I had a big wake up call and realized, I was, the media was delving into areas that I have some knowledge about, and that I have colleagues that have an intense amount of knowledge. And I also am at least scientifically literate in areas that, I don't have expertise. I still have enough knowledge that I can read the research and make sense of it. And what I was seeing scientifically that was happening, there was almost no there was no similarity to what was being presented in the media, and
Right.
oftentimes it was almost the direct opposite.
Yeah.
And when they touched on an area that I had some knowledge on, I realized, oh my God, we were being told not sometimes a warped version of the truth, sometimes the exact opposite of the truth.
Yeah.
And then I started like wondering, how far back does this go? How long has this been going back? Because, if the media or an authority is going to tell you about something that you don't know about, you have no way of fact checking unless
Right.
you dig in. And, I was wondering, has the media been, distorting or inverting the truth on other things that I, just don't have any expertise in? And how long has it been going on for?
Yes. The answer is yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like or dislike Donald Trump, he coined the phrase "fake news" back in his
Yeah.
first presidency, and it stuck, and it really got people thinking about, well, is the media telling me the truth? Like,
Yeah.
and so I won't give him credit for a lot of things, but he did call out the media, and he still calls out the media, and he,
Yeah.
for his own ego quite often, but it doesn't matter. He called them out as being fake. Like,
Yeah.
are you presenting real stuff, or are you presenting what sells news, right? Or even your political biases,
So when you talk about the fake news, there's an author by the name of Edward de Bono, and he actually coined a term, lateral thinking. We didn't have that term before he invented it. He also coined the term, it didn't catch on as much, but frenemy. So someone
Yeah,
who's a
so-
friend and an enemy,
Yeah.
it's oftentimes not black or white. It depends on the situation, if
Yeah.
someone's interests are aligned with yours or not. And one of the things he talks about is, if we do not have a word for it, it's very hard for us to think about something.
Right.
And I think the coining, popularizing the term fake news
Yeah.
did us, around the world a real service
Yes.
because, fake news wasn't really on our radar.
No.
And now we've got this nice term, oh, it's fake news. And it at least allows us, it gives us the vocabulary to talk about something. If we do not have the vocabulary to talk about something, we don't have the vocabulary to think about something.
Yeah. Ah, that's great. Well, Stefan, I think we could talk all day, but I think we have to wrap up. I did. We didn't really get a chance to get into the Ozempic
Yeah.
and the Monjavi and whatever. But maybe another
Yeah,
episode. I
why don't
know
we
that.
do a separate one just on that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. Because you said you had maybe some uh, opposing views on the negative effects of these things, and I'm very open to hearing those things. I think it has become very common now for
Yeah.
people. Like Ozempic is I know so many people on it, who have been
Yeah.
prescribed it, and so it's becoming this thing. So I think it's worthy of talking about, and it's not all good, but I think there's a lot of good
Yeah.
in it, and you may see some other things that I don't see. So yeah, we could do another
So
episode.
if we could take a couple minutes and touch on a couple of those, because I don't want to give you the wrong impression.
Yeah,
The safety profile of these medications is looking pretty good.
yeah,
And while we don't have long-term data, I think, the longest one of them has been on the market is 10 years. I mean, that's long enough for a lot of bad stuff to start showing up. But the stuff most people know about is the decreased muscle mass and decreased bone
yes,
density.
yes,
I think that this is probably uh, twofold. One, I don't think it's directly from the medication. Like, I think a lot of the benefits are not directly from the medication. I think most of in my opinion, and again, I'm not an expert in this, but a lot of the benefits of the medication are due to the effect it has on appetite and what it allows you to do. And
and
we
also glucose metabolism, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
But that's also interacting with your appetite as well too.
yeah,
So, and how it's affecting insulin and stimulating these receptors and so on. But that the willpower that it gives you and the decreased appetite now allows you to eat better. It's motivating a lot of people to exercise. It allows you to eat less. It allows you to become less impulsive and
right.
eat better foods and,
Yes,
and less snacking and things like this. And I think a lot of the positives and the negatives are actually downstream from that. And I think a lot of the negatives in terms of decreasing muscle mass and bone density can be mitigated by avoiding complete starvation.
yes,
Okay. Because in a high enough dose, these medications can amputate your appetite.
yes.
And if you
And
just
by the way, I've
stop,
tested them out,
yeah,
and I reached a point where I had to fight to eat.
yeah,
Like I could eat a little handful of chicken and feel stuffed, and
yeah,
I knew that I wasn't even close to being full,
yeah,
but my brain was saying you are so full, and I had to force myself. And so
yeah,
I tested these things out because I like to know the effects of these things
yeah,
before I ever even talk about them.
yeah,
And so I took it to a level of where I realized this is not good for me. Like
yeah.
this is going to kill me.
What dosage was that? Do you remember that?
I think it was only as high as 5 milligrams weekly,
5 milligrams weekly. And
and that's a low dose.
tirzepatide is being prescribed at much higher doses than that
Up
as
to
well
12,
too.
I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
up to 12. So, if someone were to completely stop eating for long periods of time, they're not only going to lose fat, they're going to lose bone, they're going to lose muscle, they're going to lose everything. So I think what someone does when they're taking these medications is a better guide to what's going to happen. And I think if someone is still eating well
Yes.
and eating sufficient, and certainly eating sufficient amounts of protein and resistance training,
Yes.
I think that a lot of those risks, those physiological risks, can probably be mitigated.
So here's the challenge. I think it's great that these peptides have now become mainstream. I think the more peptides become mainstream because the pharmaceuticals can make money on them,
Yeah.
the better for humanity. Problem is that, like a tirzepatide or a semaglutide, it's the goal of the pharmaceutical company to keep you on it because
Yeah.
that's how they make money. It's like
Yeah.
you've just bought a prescription for life
Yeah.
to their medication. Plus, they want to get you on the maximum dose because that's the most profitable for
Yeah.
them. But I don't think that's so from a profit point of view, you're pushing in this direction, which is
Yeah.
an unhealthy direction. I think for, a morbidly obese person to get them down to a healthier weight, that's great. But the plan should be to go the other way and to reduce the amount you take until you sort of at this basic level where it's modulating glucose, your
Yeah.
glucose levels, and it's doing some really good things, but it's not having these negative side effects. Oh, sorry, adverse
Yeah.
effects.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
the problem with adding money to the equation is now there's no motivation to get people off of this thing or reduce their
Yeah.
intake of it.
Yeah. So, um, everything we're talking about is sort of would fall under the category of responsible use scenarios, some
Yes.
version of responsible use. And this is why I'm saying I think the adverse effects I'm worried about are probably not going to be something you thought about. And it's the irresponsible use scenarios. And I'm not talking about just someone using it when they don't necessarily absolutely need to. One of the one of my biggest concerns is actually people with eating disorders,
Ah, yes, yes, yes,
and
yes,
especially anorexics.
yes.
This is
Oh
the
gosh,
one
that would be
thing that saves a lot of anorexics' lives is their appetite.
yes,
They're forced to eat a little.
yes, yes,
This is going to allow these drugs are going to allow anorexics to be 100% successful.
yes,
If you want to kill yourself by not eating,
yes.
these will, in sufficient dose, 100% probability,
Block your
give you
appetite.
the power to do so.
Yes, I agree.
And that terrifies me. And you
Now
combine,
they would have to get it black market because I can't imagine a doctor prescribing an anorexic with an obesity drug or even you know,
but as you know, there's a gray market with these as well
yeah,
too, and under research license, and they're easy to produce as well too. So
yes,
even if that gray market gets regulated, the black market is still going to be, I think, readily available.
yes.
And look, a lot of people manage to get medications that were not prescribed. I mean,
That's easy to get medications.
and this, I'll say the eating disorders, specifically
Yeah, that's scary.
anorexics, terrifies me.
That's
And part of
terrifying.
it is, I don't know the stats on this, but I think eating disorders are probably a much higher prevalence now than what they used to
Was
be.
that right? Eh?
You look at social media, the
Okay.
social media effect,
Right.
uh,
Right.
and eating disorders are definitely more common in young women than they are
Yes.
in young men. And if you look at the social media comparison, the TikTok, the Instagram, stuff like this, and then you combine that with the state of mental health in our societies,
Yes. Yes.
which I think has been compounded. We are still seeing the tip of the iceberg in terms of the fallout of a lot of the societal changes that happened over the last few
From
years.
COVID too as well.
Well, I wouldn't say from COVID. I'd say from the response to COVID, from the
Yes, the response to COVID.
lockdowns.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I
Yeah.
don't mean to
Yeah.
dime a
No. No.
nickel,
That's right.
but
That's you're
I
correct.
make that distinction. It
Yes.
was not the virus
No, the
that
virus was.
got us into a lot of this stuff. It was our reaction
Yes, a
to it.
reaction to it.
I
Yeah.
know you know that.
Yeah.
The but we, I think, are seeing still the tip of the iceberg in terms of the fallout in terms of this stuff, and you combine that now with a very potent tool that allows people with eating disorders to achieve what their goal is,
Yes.
and I think you're in big trouble. There's another group, and that is the skinny people who want to get skinnier,
Right.
that acutely might not be a big problem, and I don't necessarily see themselves, essentially committing suicide, like I am concerned about some of the like the anorexics doing, functionally and not even necessarily intentionally. But
Right.
I see them as being a big problem in terms of long-term health outcomes, because as I think you probably know, there's a lot of, and again, not to be sexist, but there's a lot of women, young, middle-aged women who don't do a lot of exercise,
Right.
and they want to get skinnier just by dieting and just
Right.
losing weight, and they're not particularly active, and they're just they're reducing
Well, I think it's
calories.
it's a societal thing. We want the magic pill.
Yeah,
We want a magic pill that we can sit on a couch and look good.
yeah,
Not have to work out and not have to eat well
yeah,
and still, be lean or whatever. And I agree with that.
I think that group in particular is going to be a high risk of sarcopenia and osteoporosis later.
Yeah.
And I predict a lot of morbidity in those groups once they become elderly.
Yeah. I
So,
think for any great discovery, there's always the negative side.
yeah,
For anything great in the world, there is a negative side.
yeah,
And it, I don't know how to regulate that because, like you said, like I don't see these people being able to get it through a doctor, but I
yeah,
can see getting it in the gray market, the black market,
yeah.
whatever. If a person's determined enough, they'll figure out a way to get it.
Yeah, well, I think talking about it, like what we're doing, is useful. Regulation is one thing, but again, as you mentioned, like regulation can oftentimes be circumvented,
Yes.
and I think that there's, we have personal responsibilities as well too, and communicating as individuals and self-regulating, I think, is really important, and getting that awareness out there is really important. And right now, everybody is very enthusiastic about these medications for good reason.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a lot of benefits coming out of them, but like any new technology, there's a mass scale adoption,
Yeah.
and then later on we see the downside of things, and you see a swing backwards, and then half the time something gets regulated out of existence because it swung too far the one way rather than the other. But I certainly think, patients with eating disorders or individuals with eating disorders, this is something that
Body dysmorphia.
family
So
and friends need to have on their
I have
radar.
body dysmorphia, believe it or not. I think I'm very fit, and I know that. But because I was fat as a boy,
Yeah,
I always consider myself fat.
yeah,
Now, luckily, and I dealt with that very unhealthily in my teens and my early 20s.
yeah,
I would starve myself almost
yeah,
sometimes just to be lean. And now, as I've gotten older, I know it, so I'm very aware of it. I like eating and I like to be
yeah,
healthy. So my desire to be healthy and fit and all those have a health span far exceed my body's dysmorphia, right? But I never feel like, oh, I'm just right. And so, a medication like that for someone with body dysmorphia could take them over to the other side where they're actually not
yeah.
being healthy and not being. Yeah.
So, uh,
You
you know,
asked to see my abs earlier because
yeah,
of, we're talking about BMI,
I
and I
wanted to
said
I wanted
no.
to estimate your body fat
Yeah,
percentage. Yeah,
yeah, and I said no. It's because I'm very self-conscious
right.
about myself. Yeah.
So, I wonder, is your body dysmorphia not? Could it have driven some of these? Would it be safe to say you've actually channeled your body dysmorphia into a productive
Yes,
manner, where
absolutely.
it's actually driven you
Yes.
towards
Oh
longevity and
yeah.
health goals?
Yeah.
You know?
I exercise because it's healthy, but I also exercise for vanity. And yes, it's been a very positive
Yeah,
now later in life. It's been a very positive motivator for me
yeah,
to stay healthy.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, the most successful people I know, a handful of my good friends, are entrepreneurs, and most of them are two of the most successful are clearly ADHD,
Yeah.
and I think their ADHD and constantly driving for more and looking for something is the reason they're successful. And I wonder if your body dysmorphia is maybe the reason why you've been successful health wise.
Yeah.
You
Absolutely.
know,
Yeah.
and
100%.
is it a bad thing?
But it was a bad thing when I didn't
Sure.
know it, when I couldn't label it, when I couldn't put a word to
Yeah.
it. And so it's only understanding it that it's become this
Yeah.
motivating factor.
And I've heard, from multiple patients before this idea of body dysmorphia that, or in some people, it just takes a long time to catch up. So they lose the weight, and it might take them 10 years to realize they've lost the weight,
Yeah.
in terms of their body image. But to take one step broader, when I look at my patients, with PTSD, and we've all got our insecurities, we've all got our
Yeah.
fears and our complexes and traumas. And, I've said before, I think that's what we are. That's what makes us up as individuals, is we are a collection of traumas and scars and
Yeah. Yeah.
insecurities. And some of these, maybe like body dysmorphia in your case, you may never get rid of them. I think some scars can never be healed,
Yeah.
but if you can channel them in the right way and make them productive, that's, I think, what makes us who we are and drives us. And
But that's the key. First of all, a person has to acknowledge, ADHD. I'm probably ADD at the very least, if not
Yeah.
ADHD. But coming to understand that my brain goes all over the place, and that's
Yeah.
really, when I focus, I hyper focus, but when I don't focus, I'm scattered. That's
Yeah.
why we can go off on tangents. My brain will
Yeah.
just track with wherever we're going. But knowing it, when you don't know it, it's dangerous. When you
Yeah.
know it, you can work with it.
Yeah.
So body dysmorphia, I can work with. It's
Yeah.
okay. It's my motivating factor for being healthy, for being fit,
Yeah.
or one of them. ADHD. Well, I now know that that's because I'm also very creative, right?
Yeah.
So, and a lot of people with ADHD are also very creative,
Yeah.
and they create new ideas, right? So that's a blessing and it's a gift. But when you don't know it, it can be a real curse, because all you do, you just feel really bad about yourself that I'm having trouble focusing on one thing. I think, you're also very creative and you have all these ideas and you want to learn all these things. So,
Yeah.
so I think
We're a
it's not
bad
about the,
combination.
yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's, it's about knowing it though, and then being
Yeah.
able to do something with it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So awareness is the first part.
Yeah.
Awareness, I think I'm just making this up as I go, but I'm probably parroting some kind of 12-step program or something. But awareness, accepting it,
Yeah.
and then finding ways to channel it productively. And, I'm daily inspired by my patients. And, I'm lucky enough to work with a lot of patients who have been through some extreme scenarios
Oh,
and
yeah.
have seen things that you and I can't even imagine.
Yes.
And I will see them on various stages in their journey. And, they almost all go through stages where it's, horrific and they're hitting rock bottom.
Yeah.
But many of them, you see them on the other side, and those very things that traumatize them are what are driving them to be good people and
Oh,
better
yeah.
and better fathers and
Yeah.
better in within their communities. And it was those very traumas that they saw that are actually driving that. And I think there's even the converse in society. There's those of us, and again, I've learned this stuff vicariously through other people, but I had a very protected upbringing. I grew up, middle class and, white collar. Most of my friends are white collar. And I wouldn't say that I've seen any real adversity in my life. I'm almost embarrassed to say that.
Yeah.
And as such, um, I don't think many of us don't truly appreciate what risk is and what, uh, uh, how good our life is now as
Right.
well too. We're scared of very simple risks,
Yes.
and we don't know what it's like to work hard,
Yes.
and we don't know what it's like to feel pain. We have this impression that life should be pain-free,
Yeah.
and that's not realistic for the vast majority of people, especially as we get older. Almost everybody has some degree of pain as we get older.
Oh, yeah.
And we've been protected in such a manner that I think we've lost track of what life is really like. And I think to some extent, it may have decreased our quality as human beings.
Yeah,
And
because we're always looking for ease. It's I again, as a person of faith, I call it the gospel of ease. There's a lot of
yeah,
Christians who think life should be easy.
yeah,
Well, when Jesus preached, he said exactly the opposite.
yeah,
When he told his apostles, basically, you guys are going to be killed in a
yeah,
very humanly way, and you're going to be tortured and whatever. I think we seek ease. We live in a
yeah,
culture of ease, right? And I have a son, and my job is to protect him and to
hmm
give him the best life possible, to give him a leg up on. But I have to be cautious with not making his life always easy, because ease is not a
yeah,
gift, because at some point I won't be around and he'll have to face adversity.
yeah.
I think we're not used to facing adversity.
Well, there's this saying, hard times make hard men, soft times make soft men, something to that effect. And
Yeah.
if you haven't faced that adversity, I don't think you've grown as an individual.
The
And
adversity I've faced in my life has made me the man I am, and has made me resilient and determined, and
yeah,
so many things, and self-aware, and so many wonderful things.
yeah,
The thing is, you never wish adversity on your children,
yeah,
because
yeah.
it's just your nature to want to protect them, but adversity is going to make them great.
But if
Great
you're
people.
successful at protecting them, they don't grow up
Yeah.
resilient. And I savor that. The toughest times in my life are the ones that I grew on.
Yeah.
and again, I haven't had a tough life. I've been very fortunate, but the few tough times I've had are those lessons that I've learned, and I've been lucky to have some adversity in my life at
Yeah.
least. And I don't think I'd be a good individual or a good human being. And I think some of it I've learned from my patients as well too. So you can always learn from the mistakes of others, and you can learn from the tough times of others as well too.
Yeah.
But that's, I would say, forget about the technical side of my work as a chiropractor. That's one of the things I appreciate the most is uh, learning, getting a slice of people's lives
Mm.
and
Yes.
learning the lessons that they've learned and seeing them change in their journey. And I know that sounds really fluffy,
No,
but
I think it's
but it's
fantastic.
it's it's given me, just like reading books can open up experience. My patients are all books, and I've learned most of my life lessons I've learned from my patients. I haven't learned from school.
Yeah.
I've learned from my patients.
Well, no, I think it's not fluffy. It's life. I said, what I go back to when I said, well, what's my purpose here on
Yeah,
life on this earth? Well, I get to, I lead a couple of men's groups, and I get to walk with men, and
yeah,
and watching people flourish in, there's such a joy, and it's not fluffy. That's like,
yeah,
that's the joy of life. I mean,
yeah,
it can't be about me. It's about walking in community. Your community is your patients sometimes,
yeah, yeah.
and watching them flourish.
And they're
It's
my teachers.
Yeah, and your
Yeah,
teachers. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. I learned as much
No,
from my
no,
men's
my
group.
patients are my teachers.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
That's what I mean. Yeah,
yeah,
and the guys I walk with are my teachers as well.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, on that note, we'll wrap up, Stefan. I think we could just talk for the day, but do have to limit this. So I really appreciate you being here. I appreciate the conversation, and
Yeah.
we'll definitely have to do some more focused ones.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.